Hi everyone, thanks for having me here today. It's my first time in Berlin, second time in Germany, so it's been a great trip so far. I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of you after this chat. For today's talk, wanted to kind of share a lot of the lessons I've learned in customer acquisition over the time. So, as Lou said, we're kind of taking a step back from what Guillaume has talked to you about and kind of going back to those initial steps of how to even get the customers to begin with. Before jumping into it, a little bit about me. I'm originally from Oakland. Oakland's a city right next to San Francisco. The one thing I'll tell you about people from Oakland is we love telling you that we're not San Francisco. And so I need to be very, very clear, we are not San Francisco, but we're a big part of the Bay Area. I've been in tech and growth for over 10 years, worked at some pretty cool companies. I was most recently at Oscar Health in New York. Before that, I led digital over at Dropbox, helping kind of build that from the ground up when we first launched our first business product. And then before that, some time at some companies that didn't work out so well, and before that, eBay as well. And I think the great thing about growing up in the Bay Area is I've just been building websites since I was a kid. I think I built my first website when I was 12 years old. I didn't even know what SEO was. I didn't even know what analytics was. You put like a counter on your homepage, realize that hey, you should probably put this on every other page of your site. And so kind of the great thing is not really too much has changed since then. There's better technology, there's better tools, but a lot of the lessons I learned, even as a 12-year-old in the Bay Area, a lot of that still applies to me today. Cool, and so for today's talk, what I'm going to be getting into is kind of what you need to focus on when you're starting to think about customer acquisition. What's something that I like to kind of call is the make it work approach. Acquisition isn't a thing that you just run and it either works or it doesn't. You really have to pull out all the stops to really make your acquisition campaigns work. And I'll go into a few examples about how I was able to do that at Dropbox and at other companies. And then finally, not too much here, but kind of going beyond a lot of the basics, there's two big things I really figured out in the last 10 years that's just really kept kind of staying true, and hopefully these lessons will help you in the campaigns that you run. So what we're not going to talk about is a lot of the basics around how to start your first AdWords campaign, your first Facebook campaign. This stuff is very, very well documented online. We'll be sharing this with, I believe, everyone here. So if you want to read how to go build that, if you're in the early stages of launching first campaigns, Google is your friend. There's a ton of great documentation online. And the one thing that's kind of changed today that I'd say it's actually a little bit easier than it was before. I think just maybe a couple of months ago, a report came out that every additional dollar spent on online advertising, something like 86 or 90% all went to Facebook and Google. And we're just in a world today where these two giants have just sucked up a lot of the attention. And if you do those two things well, you're pretty much in a good spot. It doesn't mean there are no other channels out there, but it does kind of make it a little bit easier and harder on you today. But I think there's some principles I can share today that might help you along that way. Cool. So instead of kind of going through the basics, there's two things that, having spent the last 6 months kind of advising and helping startups, I probably at least got coffees with 50 plus startups. And there's two things that I always hear people ask. They always hear people say, it kind of leads to very bad results. And I'm just going to focus my talk today entirely around those two things. So the first one, and if you're a founder today, you may say it. If you're in marketing, you may hear it. Someone goes to a coffee, they run back, they say, oh my goodness, I talked to this company and they're killing it here. Why aren't we doing that? And if you're a founder, please don't do this. And if you're in the marketing or growth side, don't worry, don't rip your hair out. This is a very, very kind of dangerous fallacy that people do. But I think there's a few kind of ground rules that you can kind of get around this challenge. And kind of I think the answer to that question is, it's really easy to go hear about the hot company today, learn about what they do. But I mean, it's not a big surprise that your mileage is going to vary. The tactics that are going to work for you are going to vary by what industry you're in, the timing. Something like affiliate may have been a great channel 5 years ago. Maybe 4 years ago, all people talked up was viral and K-factors and things like that. Today, it's all about influencer marketing, and in the US, it's picking up a lot of steam. Everyone is really interested in podcast marketing. The thing is, this stuff is going to change, and the more you listen to other people, you only get an answer when it's already too late, because someone's figured it out, they're happy to go do a talk about it, they're going to go publish it, and by the time you're doing it, they're doing something else, and this is a very, very dangerous thing to stay away from. Instead, I'd probably focus in saying the one thing that kind of really affects what kind of acquisition tactics you can do and where you really need to kind of keep your mindset is just be very aware of what your LTV is. And I'm sure you've heard like all the acronyms, like what's your LTV, what's your CAC, what's your CPA, like WTF, like I don't really care, I don't really know. And I would probably like simplify it, and this is probably the best way to kind of boil it down for you so you don't rip your hair out trying to figure out how these things all impact yourself. The way I tend to think about it is LTV basically controls everything, because from there that factors in how well you monetize your users, how well they retain, and when you're starting out, you're just going to have to throw assumptions in. And when you have that, you kind of boil down this number of how much are you willing to pay. If a customer's worth $1 million to you, what % of that are you willing to pay to go find new customers that are worth that same amount? From there, you break it down to your actual customer acquisition cost. And for a lot of people at the very top of your funnel, maybe you just want web visitors, maybe you just want emails, maybe you just want likes. I really hope that's not what you're still doing. That's another old tactic that people just gave up on, is this kind of informs like what you can really do. And from here, one kind of like visualization that I like to do is where you kind of sit in this quadrant really kind of defines what are the things you can do. You could have a really high LTV, you can have a really low LTV. Is it a $1 user, is it $1 million a user? And then what's really interesting is not only looking at your direct competitors, but looking at the people who are targeting the same customer you are, because those people are gonna really kind of define what you can do and you can't do. And if you're lucky, you have really great LTVs on both ends, you could literally do anything. You could do dumb ideas, you could just buy everything that's out there, you can do absolutely everything. Not a lot of you are gonna be here, very few companies are there today, but it's just kind of an example that I like to give. If you're on the lower end, if you're getting started, if you have some VC capital, you're probably gonna have to focus a lot more on organic. You're just not gonna have the resources to do a lot of things you see a lot of other people do, and you're gonna really just have to be a lot more creative on this end. And the really, really dangerous thing is when you kind of go back to that, you know, when your founder comes back, or if you're the founder and you come back with this like great story about how Spotify has figured out how to do X, Y, and Z. But one thing to really kind of keep in mind is like being aware of where you are here really kind of saves your team and saves yourself time for really investing in the wrong tactics, because maybe it works in the beginning, but the LTVs aren't there, you're gonna be overpaying. Next thing you know, you're gonna be out of cash. And the example I kind of like to give here is, you know, Dropbox, Box, Salesforce, this is back from my time there. We're all very different businesses, but if you people love to compare Dropbox and Box. Dropbox at the time focused on small businesses, Box focused on medium-sized businesses. Because we were small and we had a huge free user component, we couldn't do the out-of-home things like billboards or buying out airports. It really kind of made sense. We really had to focus on like, how do you get your free users into paid? We had something, today the company has like 500 million. When I was there, we had about 200 million. It was way more effective for us to figure out how to build like an internal advertising system, how to email directly to them, how do you retarget them with advertising to really get free users into paid, than say following a box down this, we're gonna do every trade show, we're gonna do every trade event, because for us it really didn't make sense. And the other point about kind of just keeping in mind what people who target the same audience do, because this gets really dangerous, because if you go a couple blocks up the street from Dropbox, you got Salesforce, who are, if you're targeting the enterprise, targeting small business, they're also going after CIOs, team managers, anyone with a corporate credit card can sign up for a short-term deal. And Salesforce is known for like giving away free tacos, buying out food trucks. You know, I heard about a campaign my friend that did there was like, hey, what if we just unleashed a bunch of Salesforce balloons on Market Street? Wouldn't that create a lot of buzz? I think that makes a lot of sense if your average selling price at Salesforce is $100,000 versus to getting started Dropbox is $1,000. There's just completely different tactics and different things you have to focus on based on like where your LTVs are. Cool. But what if your LTVs are low? What if your CPAs are high? Like, is it the end of the world? Short answer, like, it's not. And a lot of what strong companies do today is like, these are numbers, these are KPIs you can move. And the best companies today is that have really kind of figured out how to do this in tandem. You got to get your like marketing teams or your growth teams and your technical side, product engineering. I know some places might still call them IT. Please don't call them IT, but I know some people still do it. You got to work together. Product has to continue building a product that customers love. That will make them sticky. That'll get them more likely to buy. That'll up your LTVs. Marketing really kind of needs to figure out a way how to keep them through all the mechanisms and triggers you can. So if you're running any type of email campaigns, trigger notifications, anything around brand, that will help you keep your customers and up your LTVs and ultimately let you do more marketing. On the CPA side, I think it's kind of well known all the types of optimizations you can do with like creative, landing pages, things like that. But I think Guillaume gave a great example where his team actually got really technical, built this entirely automated ABM type of system. And I think that's the kind of like partnerships between marketing, product, and engineering that are really able to kind of like drive down your cost. And it's a thing that I know is really common. It's really, really hard to do, but if you can do it, like that's an area that really kind of unlocks the growth. And it kind of builds this loop where marketing, product build higher LTVs. Now parts of marketing can do more acquisition. They can do more acquisition. You have more money. Now you can hire more engineers to do more product growth type things. Awesome. Quote number 2. Well, we tried this in the past. It didn't work. So we stopped. And this is probably another very, very, very common thing that I heard people do. Like, oh, we launched a Facebook campaign, didn't work. We tried Pinterest ads, didn't work. And kind of really the truth of it is to really kind of make a channel work, it's not just like spending a couple of dollars, getting a couple of clicks and seeing what comes out. Like you really have to get in the mind of the customer and really kind of understand like, what do you have to do to tune your campaign? What do you have to do to tune your website, everything to actually get someone to sign up, convert, and do what you want them to do. And so the story I'm going to tell you is really kind of my experience at Dropbox, because I think it's a really good example, because before I joined the company was known as this massive like viral growth, refer a friend, get free space, kind of organic user growth channel. And the company did phenomenal at that. I had zero, nothing to do with it. I can just stand up here and tell you guys about it like I did, but I had absolutely nothing to do. But I joined 1 month right after they launched the first business product. And what it meant was everything changed. The whole thing's around like building these like referral viral loops, building a very simple product where the homepage is just one button. That's not how you get someone to put down their credit card and give you $1,000 right away. And so we had to kind of basically drop everything that we knew and completely kind of relearn what is the right messaging, what is the right conversion, and how do you make this work? Because we just took the campaigns we were running before, pushed into the business side. No one like paid us $1, got no trials, nothing. And so to go back to the basics, you really kind of like get down into the customer's mindset. I think Guillaume mentioned this earlier too. It's like, what are the pain points? What are the customers trying to do? And for Dropbox, it was really easy at that time because a lot of this did the same problems businesses had, consumers had as well. USB drives were annoying. You have to carry them around. You forget, you lose everything. Sometimes like they just break. FTPs and file servers where a lot of media agencies were using prior to Dropbox and a lot of these cloud solutions today. That was really annoying, very insecure. You had to go learn how to use FTP server. You had to drag and drop, very annoying stuff. You couldn't send large files over email, and multiple editors on a shared file just really made collaboration a pain. And the great thing about Dropbox was the product was truly great. And it is truly great, is that it was a one-stop shop to basically replace all these systems. If you look at the very first web page that came out it was called Dropbox for Teams back then, all of those pain points, all of the things that we did to fix those issues, we didn't say a word of it. And so it really didn't matter if you could find the right Facebook campaign or find the right keyword. It doesn't really matter when someone gets to your website and you say nothing, because all it says is, oh, hey, we're Dropbox for Teams. Just give us your money. This is literally what this says to a customer. And so we went through like a 10 iteration in terms of figuring out what the right campaigns are. But it really kind of just boiled down to just kind of redoing your entire messaging around like focusing on those pain points. And before we even got here, a lot of this came from just interviews with customers, asking them what they use us for, and really kind of taking that to kind of inform the initial hypotheses. And this is a modern version of the website today. The first ones we did, very, very ugly. We had zero engineering help. We basically had to like hack together a horrible page, basically do the equivalent of what 99 Designs is and build it on Marketo. But that kind of got us the wins actually getting the website to where it is today, where we actually have every single use case mapped out. We basically have separate pages that kind of have like each solution there, and we can, from there, really smartly kind of route the campaigns based on what the customer pain points, what they want, and getting them to the right, really kind of the right page that kind of speaks to them. And doing this alone just upped our conversion rates for these campaigns anywhere from like 20 to 50%. And to take a quick break, I guess like, the more I think about it, it's interesting because this is a talk about acquisition campaigns. I spent zero time talking about acquisition campaigns. And I think for the most part, like, we're in a world where these tips are very, very well documented. But if you can kind of take one step down the funnel and figure out what it is about your website, your messaging, your flows that are really making it hard for those campaigns to convert, that's going to do a heck of a lot more than like finding new keywords, trying new campaigns, because you're just going to keep running into this issue of I keep finding new campaigns. I go to this website. Why don't they sign up? And it really kind of comes down to getting to your customer's head. This is another example. One thing you're going to find out is like, great, this first win, amazing, is 50%. You do something else, it's 20%. You do something else, now you're down to 10. Now you're kind of running out of like things to do because there's only so many button color tests, copy tests, different visualizations you can show. But the one thing I want to keep in mind is like, keep going down the funnel, follow the entire path. The further you go down, I'm going to warn you, the closer you get into the products world, but like that's where building this relationship is going to really help you a lot. Because for us, we basically did everything we could do on the messaging side. And we were like, okay, what else can we do? Let's just go to the next step and see what it looked like. And very much like our first example, the very first iteration of our business page was, okay, great, we fixed this thing, and this is it. It was like, give us your money. And when you kind of like did the user research, go like on usertesting.com and like figure out like what people are thinking about, what's giving them pause, there was just a ton of things about this flow that customers just didn't get. This is a brand new product. Unless you're really into tech news and you read all the articles about us, if we don't say this on the website, we don't really like build that trust to get someone to convert. And instead what we had to do was, from this series of interviews, from user testing, working really close with the product team that should get most of the credit for this, is we basically kind of introduced very good messaging along the way to kind of figure out all the reasons why people said no. Number one, it's, okay, we're one of the few companies that require a credit card. Why do you need the credit card? Am I getting a charge? No. Like, how do I get your money back? Answer all these questions to make it really easy and make it very kind of trustworthy for someone to give you their information, because especially if we're talking about small businesses, a lot of times this is some guy without a corporate credit card. They might even be putting this on their own credit card before they can expense it. And like really kind of understanding that and kind of pivoting the way you do messaging and adding the social proof and all the kind of things you can probably test, we basically boil it down to a handful of things. It's for us, and it's going to be different for you, is we just figured out, what are you doing with their credit card? Who else uses you? This is the first time we heard that you had a business product. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And then kind of still reiterating all the things around like the solutions around the pain that our customers are having. Cool. And that was another big win. It got up to 50%. And I don't have a slide for this, but basically before we launched any of our acquisition campaigns, like we just realized like our website, our conversion flow, it just wasn't working. And so the kind of lesson here was that sometimes when your acquisition campaigns don't work, like don't spend more time just looking at acquisition, look at the full funnel, look at the full steps, see if there's any blocks anywhere, patch those leaky parts of the funnel. And then this really, from this point, it really kind of unlocked us to doing a lot of other things. This opened us up into doing Facebook ads, this opened us up into doing retargeting much better. And then later on, we had a team build out an entire like internal ad system where it was just, hey, we can identify potential businesses using our free service. How do you drive them through the same funnel to get them to convert? And a lot of this kind of like laid the groundwork for that. Awesome. All right, so how do you get to this point? Well, something that's really easy that I like to kind of break out is you kind of have to like build the testing matrix for figuring out how all of this works. And when we first kind of like put this together, it wasn't so much like, oh, hey, I have an idea. There's kind of like a method for that it's really bad. It's kind of called like the hippo form of prioritization, where you get everyone in a room, everyone throws a bunch of ideas on the wall, and the hippo stands for the highest paid person in the room. That person gets to decide what you go test. That's a very dangerous way, because now you're back into like coffee shop meetings, here's what we heard, and if it doesn't work, then it's like it doesn't work. You really have to kind of lay out all the possible ways you could, all the use cases you do, all the ways you can kind of target the audience you have. What are all the kind of selling propositions, messaging you really need to kind of hook these people, and then ultimately figure out what the right sales path is for that customer. And it's kind of a little game where you just have to figure out what these combinations are, try as much as you can, and when you find the right path, that's where you kind of really kind of double down your funnel optimization and running more campaigns through that. But making it work isn't just finding one of these paths, and if it doesn't work, you give up on the whole thing. You really kind of have to understand like what are all the ways and all the paths of conversion, all the ways you can message people. And if you run through this, even if you fail the first time, second time, third time, there's going to be a way where you figure out what works best for your company. Awesome. So there's probably still somebody in here like, hey, what's a silver bullet? Just tell me that I should just buy influencers and run a bunch of stuff there. And this message I keep telling people, like there really still is no silver bullet. And if you kind of like go back to my first point around, if you wait until someone tells you that there's a best practice, it's way too late. And if you look at Google Trends or even talk to people, you look at the last 15 years of like what the hot marketing topic is, it's going to change every 1 year, every 2 years. And so by the time someone tells you, it's probably too late. There's a period of time where everyone rushed to SEO. There's a period where everyone rushed to viral marketing. There's a period where everyone rushed to like Facebook when it was like brand new. Now Facebook is really expensive. And I almost guarantee you that right now, there's a really dumb idea out there that it sounds dumb to, if it sounds dumb to you, it sounds dumb to everyone else, which means someone has an advantage to going to do it. And a really good example I have here is, I wasn't responsible for this, but Oscar is really, really known for running subway ads in New York. And if you go to New York now, if anyone's been in the last year, you go on any subway car, it's like a VC's website. It's like every company logo, every startup imaginable, every train car you are, there's a startup. But when we started running those campaigns, which were really, really effective for us, we were competing against like pharmacy drug trials, like shady bankruptcy lawyers. It was dirt cheap buying these campaigns. If you go there today, 4x the cost. Every startup founder you talk to is really interested in subway ads. They keep asking Oscar people, like, what do you do with subway ads? And we tell them, we haven't run subway ads in 2 years. We're on to the next thing. And like that's really kind of the mindset that you have to be in for yourself. You still try these things, but like don't bank on them to be like the big silver bullet. It's gonna like get all your users and solve all your user growth challenges. Last point I want to mention is that if you kind of think about the stage of your company, different channels are going to work at different times. Like if you're just starting out, paid acquisition is going to be great. Like it's going to get you your first users. It's going to be very, very straightforward on how to do it. But over time, it's not going to scale. There's going to be other channels, whether it's figuring out how to do word of mouth better, and that's just really building a good product and good brand. How to figure out like content and SEO right. You kind of have to realize where you are at a certain stage and not expect just because the first 1 year of like trying growth, paid acquisition drove like $10 million, you can't expect in the next year you're going to drive 10 or 20 because everything just kind of hits a ceiling. And being aware of where you are in this and building a really diverse portfolio of growth acquisition campaigns is really kind of the key that you have to focus on. And just summarizing everything, the 3 points I kind of want everyone to take away with today is, base acquisition tactics on where your LTV is. Be realistic about what you can and can't do at scale, not based on what you've heard from like the latest growth talk or the latest like coffee fireside chat with insert some founder. Stick with the first principles about what you can and can't do and build from there. 2, for a channel to work, you need to make it work. Don't just try it once and give up. Like really exhaust all the possible ways, get in the customer's mindset, and figure out what you have to do to make it work and invest the resources in doing it. And finally, how effective and how much scale you can really run out of a campaign. It really just depends on the time. If everyone knows about it, really hard. If no one knows about it, it's pretty good. And if you're going to be most effective if you're one of the first ones in the door. And that's it. Any questions?
Can you share some tactics about finding those new marketing channels, like the subway ads? How did you discover that they could work for you?
So the good thing is they're really not that secretive. They're there. There's some sales guy or woman in your email inbox right now pitching you something. The more dumb it sounds, the more likely it could be a thing. You just have to get ahead of the curve before it works. Like one thing we hear from a lot of people who do really well at podcast sponsorships is last year, all these great podcasts, like in the US, Joe Rogan's really big. A lot of like the stuff on sports around the Ringer is really big. People locked in 1 year pricing. And now that the podcasts are huge and everyone wants to get in, the early advertisers are already locked in. And so, it's less about finding diamonds in the rough. It's just kind of being willing to try and being willing to kind of invest some time into other things. And one thing that I've kind of done with past marketing budgets that I manage is I like to dedicate whatever your appetite is, 10%, 20%, just to try things. Convince the head of finance, convince your CEO to say like, hey, I know you need us to manage a certain customer acquisition cost, certain CPA, but we have to really try things to really be innovative. Can you take this 10% of budget and exclude it from our channels? And a lot of people are receptive to that so long as you explain like what you're doing with that budget.
When do you decide to move from more digitally focused channels to more physical channels, like putting up ads in a subway as an example?
Yeah, so today, I guess there's two parts to that. We are quickly going into a space where you have to think outside of digital. Number one, it's because the first point I had, the majority of all spend is going to Facebook and Google. Everyone knows how to do it. It's super competitive to get it right. And especially if you look at that quadrant, if you're in that bottom right of lower LTVs compared to all the same type of advertisers, you're not going to stand a chance. Like, there's a reason why you don't see a single video game ad on Facebook today, and they dominated before. And it's not because of an algorithm change. It's because you look at the major games, they only monetize at like $1. Candy Crush is like $1 a user. Like, even the top like hardcore, mid-core male games, they will get at most $10 on average per blended user. If you're someone like Dropbox and you're willing to pay $100 a lead, you're going to quickly push these people outside of that market. And so like we're at that point today where you really start evaluating everything. It doesn't have to be just digital. The second part of that is the number one question you're going to be thinking about after you make that mindset change is, well, how do you do attribution? It's really hard to do this offline. And I guarantee you today, I've never met a company that said, hey, we got these data scientists, we did this great attribution modeling, and we unlocked like 3x growth. Like, it's never happened, and I've never seen it. And so implement a system that you think makes most sense to your company. Like, just do a very basic one. Maybe it's 75% last touch, and then when someone signs up or like initially comes in, you just do a quick survey at the last step. How did you hear about us? Subway ad, online, and just figure out the right percentage you're willing to allocate to that, because it is saying something if someone is willing to go hit that checkbox, and just go from there.
Yeah, thanks for the great talk. So as a startup, how do you benchmark your first results when you run experiments like in the first channels? Like, do you have any tips to just to see where we are right now? Is this good or bad?
Yep. So a couple of things. Some of you will hate this, especially if you're a founder, if you're a CFO. But there's two things that I like to keep in mind there. When you initially launch a campaign, just flat out assume you can like reduce whatever that initial CPA is by half, because you just launched the campaign, you haven't had time to like figure out what works, what doesn't work, you haven't figured out your bids, you haven't figured out what the right creative is, you haven't figured out the landing pages. Just assume you spend time on that, you're gonna at bare minimum reduce that by half. The second part of that is make sure your have good assumptions around what your retention is, what your monetization rates is, and a really easy part of doing that is just finding similar businesses and using that as a benchmark. Because if you go back to doing LTVs when you're starting, it's nothing. Like, you don't know how long a user is going to be around. But your best bet is taking good comps and starting there. And as you get more real data, replace your assumptions with like what's actually going on.
Hi. So you talk a lot about being first to market or first to market to a strategy and kind of being ahead of the game. How does that attitude change when you go from an audience that is ahead of the game to an audience that's actually behind? Like, for example, going from the consumer space to enterprise.
Could you clarify?
Yeah, sure. So I'm also from the Bay Area.
Got it.
What I find is when you change markets, you obviously change the audience. And sometimes what that means is you have to adjust what it means to the terms that they're familiar with. Like,
right.
For example, Germany, in terms of credit, is behind San Francisco.
Yep.
As an example, right? So to me, the way that I think about it is I have to adjust my attitude of what is considered novel or ahead of the game. So can you speak about your experience kind of making that mind shift, or if that even makes sense for you, specifically in context of a consumer space with a cheaper product and an enterprise space where sales cycles are a lot longer, they need more convincing, so on and so forth.
Yep. So, well, I guess the first point is, and it's indirectly related to your question, is, you know, you mentioned the difference between how do you market in Germany, how do you market in, say, the US. Like, we made a ton of those mistakes early on. There was a very good portion of time where 75% of our customers were international, but 100% of our employees were in the US. And so there were very silly things that we, like, it sounds obvious if you just ask someone where, hey, how come like Europe traffic really dips around July, August, September? Figure out that a lot of people go on vacation. How come like people convert so much worse in Europe versus the US in this period of time? We realized that, hey, we were pricing everything with a dollar sign and not like local currency, whether it's the GBP or euros or anything else like that. And I think for cases like that, by testing, you will figure this out. But I will say we probably spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to figure these basic lessons out when we could have just asked someone and like, hey, some potential customer in Germany, what's weird about our website? They could have told us right away. I think the other thing about moving from like a completely different market and consumer versus enterprise is very, very different. I think the two things I would say there is like one, very little of what works in the beginning will work in those other channels. And so it's not a great answer, but it's basically just you have to forget everything you know, and you almost have to start from new. You have to consider that it's an entirely separate product. And I'd say in the early days of Dropbox, we didn't do this. We kept everything in the same team. You had engineers who thought about the consumer world, thinking about the enterprise world, and that just did not make sense. And the best, at least initially, is to make sure people purely focus on the separate problems that are in that area. The second point that I have is, this gets very dangerous, and I kind of see it, is, I mentioned a little bit about looking at comps, looking at how other companies are doing. There is kind of a danger in terms of like wanting to be someone like some other company and force feeding that model, even if like the results or things are telling you that it didn't work. And I'll go back to one of Guillaume's charts, which was really good, where you had the self-serve model, where low conversion rates, low deal size. You got the enterprise side, which is high ACVs, hard to really convert. And there's like a period of time where we tried to do the same tactics like across the funnel. We really wanted to like prove the middle of the market, but like because the conversion rates were so low, what we should have did was just move most of those users to self-serve, which Dropbox is doing today. But we kept trying to force it and making it work. And so I think a little bit of it is just being realistic about the results and pivoting when it makes sense versus like taking something that worked and like forcing it into another part of the market.
Que la famille.